Hi everyone, myself Dr. M. Lakshmi Prasad, working as an associate professor in the Department of Data Science in Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. So in this video, I'm going to discuss about what are the various questions that may arise in principles of data management. So first question is that explain the basic terminologies of the data management. So for that, you have to know what is the data, what are the uh, how many different types of data is available. So data is nothing but the data or observations or evidences about the social world, and the data is nothing but a plural of the data that can be of two types like quantitative and qualitative in nature, and the data is going to be produced that is not given actually, and the researchers may able to choose what to call the data. It is not just there to be found. So the data and information, so the terms data and information are going to be used interchangeably. However, the terms should have distinct meanings. So first thing is the data. Data is nothing but facts, event, transactions which have been recorded, and input raw materials from which the information is going to be processed. And information is nothing but the data that have been produced in such a way to be useful for the recipient. And the basic data are going to be produced in some way to form the information, right? There is the difference between the data and information. And the nature of the data, so the nature of data will be of two types like qualitative data and quantitative data. The qualitative data is nothing but attributes, and quantitative data is nothing but variables. So the researchers which are going to be studying in behavioral science are mainly concerned with the characteristics and traits, and the tools are going to be administered to qualify these characteristics. And these data is going to be classified two types like qualitative and then quantitative. And the nature of the data, so according, if we are going to see about attributes, that should be qualitative data. If it is a variable, that should be quantitative data. So the characteristics or traits for which the numerical value cannot be assigned are called attributes. Gender and motivation example. And then qualitative data is nothing but variables. The characteristics or traits for which numerical variables can be assigned is nothing but variables. So here height and weight should be the example of that variable. And constants, so what is a constant? So constant is nothing but a characteristic or condition that is same for all observed units or sample subjects of the study. And variables is nothing but the characteristic or trait in the behavioral science which can be quantified in terms of variables. So the variables will be of two types like continuous variable and discrete variable. So the variables, first one is the continuous. What is that? So continuous is nothing but the characteristic whose observation can take any values over a particular range. That is nothing but continuous variable. And then discrete variables are those which are going to be exist only in units, not in the fractional value. That should be the discrete variable. So the continuous variable can be children and height, and then discrete variable is nothing but number of character points in village and WC count. And what is the difference between the attribute and variable? So attribute is nothing but the category of the characteristic for which the subject is going to be either belongs or does not belongs to property that the subject is either possess or does not possess. And the variable is nothing but which is going to be described the characteristics in terms of numerical value, which is going to be explained in terms of measurements. And the second difference is that the attributes are going to become sick, describing the blood group, etc., whereas the variables like height, weight, blood pressure are the examples of this variable. And next one is that qualitative data. So qualitative data is nothing but in such that there is no notion of the magnitude of the size of the characteristics. So they are just categorized, right? So the data, what is going to be classified by counting the individuals having the same characteristic or attribute and not the measurement. For example, gender, male and female, disease like present and absent, and smoke like smoking, non-smoking. So this cannot be measured in terms of nominal and then ordinal skills. Quantitative data, so quantitative is nothing but anything that can be expressed as number or quantity or magnitude. So which is going to be describe the characteristics in terms of numerical value, which are going to be expressed in terms of measurements. So example, the levels of hemoglobin in the blood and number of coma points and intraocular pressure, weight, etc. So the quantitative observations nothing but as the individual going to be represented by number, and this data cannot be measured in terms of interval and then ratio scale. And the second question is that explain the code books of the data management. So what are the elements of this code book will be like variable names and what type of variable it is, either it should be numeric or string, and the missing values and what kind of levels of measurements we're having like nominal or ordinal, interval and ratio, and dichotomy and then code. So these are the various elements of the code book. And variable names is nothing but there are some rules for the variable names in SPSS. So the variable names may include letters, numbers that must begin with letter, and does not use symbols in variable names, and there is no space in the variable names. That should be things or rules we have to be considered here. And the types of variables, so the types of variables, numeric variables contains a number only where the letters are not are going to be allowed, and the string variables must contain letters and numbers, and SPSS prefers numeric variables wherever possible, and except in cases with infinite possibilities, so convert the strings variables into the numeric variables. And different levels of measurement available like nominal. So here the value source mainly as the label or name. So when we are going to attach the numeric values to nominal values, so we are going to use the numbers as the symbols. And next levels of measurement will be ordinal. So here can able to see this ordinal level and rank order like this. And each category has a unique positive relative to the other categories. So that may be either higher, lower, larger, and smaller like this. And different levels of measurements like continuous level of data. So here the continuous level of data is nothing but interval level measurement. So here the distance of categories are going to be defined in terms of fixed and equal units. So all are going to which is going to allows us to study the difference but not appropriate magnitudes and can perform most mathematical functions. And the continuation next level of measurement with continuous data is ratio level measurement. So which is going to be have all the properties of interval scale, but the 0 point is inherently defined, and height, weight, distance is the examples, and ratio comparisons can be made here. And any mathematical manipulations appropriate for real numbers can also be applied to the ratio level numbers. And dichotomies is the another level of measurement. So the variables is going to be have only two types of categories or variables. That thing example like sex on male or female, true or false, x or no like this. And these levels of dichotomies can also be treated as either nominal, ordinal, and continuous depending on the situation. And missing values. So the missing values are able to designate either missing information, okay, where the someone does not provide an answer, or it may indicate that the particular question was not asked for the particular case. So at that time, have to be see different types of missing values. So first thing system missing, and second one is coded missing values. Codes. So the codes is nothing but SPSS prefers numerical variables whenever possible, and except in cases with infinite possibilities like names and converting the string variable to the numeric variables. So when an item requires the coding, so they are assigning numbers instead of letters to the responses, and numbers simplify both the data entry analysis. When in doubt, it is better to code or more information than the less. It is often difficult to go back and gather the additional information. So the record information is much as detailed as possible. The simple code book like this variable number and then SPSS variable name, type, levels of measurement, missing values, and code. So these are the variables that may comes under the variable, and SPSS variable name, and what type of variable it is, and what kind of levels of measurement, and what are missing values, and what kind of coding is done onto the particular variable. So this is the sample code book, and this is the another structure of the code book. So ID number, and the question age, gender, male, race, degree, program, era, study. Like this, some other kind of code book we're able to create it. And next question is what is the data and what are the different types of data. So here the data is going to be classified in two types like primary data and then secondary data. So the primary data is nothing but it is one kind of data where the data is going to be gathered by an individual person or organized group and then established practices. And the documents in their original forms, living organisms, man-made material things, natural objects and phenomena. So these are the data should be treated as the primary data. And then second one is the secondary data. So the secondary data is the data which is going to be gathered from the secondary sources like books, article published, unpublished, master degree, monographs, manuscript, and other second-hand sources. So these are the some other category of the data. So what are the advantages of primary data over the secondary data is the question. So for that what you have to do is, so the primary data frequently give the detailed definition terms and statistical units used in the survey. And second difference is that the secondary data has usually little or no explanatory notes which often arises from transcription of the figures from the original primary source. And third one is that the primary data usually includes a copy of the schedule and the description of the procedure used in selection of the type of sample and in the collecting the data. So this gives the user ideas, accuracy, applicability, and limitation of the survey result. And next advantage of the primary data over the secondary data is that the primary data is usually broken down into final classifications. So whereas the secondary data can often omit that a past of the combining categories such as showing the values instead of cities or municipalities instead of values like this. So the advantage of secondary data is that the secondary data is more convenient to use because they already condensed and organized. So it's one advantage, and then analysis and interpretation are going to be done more easily, and the libraries make the secondary data more easily accessible. So the categories of the data from the respondents. So for that, what is the respondent here? So the respondent is nothing but an individual person. So who are going to be also are requested by researcher to supply the data and information about his research problem. And the categories of the data from the respondent will be facts like personal circumstances, what they do, and then attitudes and feelings, judgment, and psychometric skills. And then the results of the text and experiments also be considered from the respondent and all other gathered from the data gathered from the primary and secondary data also. So there are several ways. Next question is that what are the several ways of the collecting data? So first one is the clerical tools. So here the clerical tools will be questionnaire method, and then interview method, and then empirical observation method, registration method, testing method, experimental method, and library method. So this is some of the clerical tools what we are going to be having. And then some of the mechanical devices for gathering the data will be microscopes, and then thermometer, cameras, rulers, and monitors. So these are some other devices what we're having for gathering the data. And next one is that illustrate the different forms of the data as the question. So here the data is going to be classified into different types. So first one is qualitative data and then quantitative data. So this quantitative data will be again divided into categories like nominal and then ordinal. So here the nominal will be the gender like man, woman, and then men, and then hair color like blonded or then brown, and then ethnicity like Hispanic and Asian. Ordinal data means here first, second, and third, and letters grades like ABC, and then economic status like low, medium, and thing will be comes under this ordinal data. And quantitative data is nothing but discrete and then continuous. So discrete will be the number of students in the class, the count you should remember, and the number of workers in the company, the number of home runs in baseball game. So this is the example of discrete data that comes under quantitative data. And continuous data will be the height of the children, square footage of a two-bedroom house, and speed of cars. So this should be the continuous data. right? So these are the some of the examples of different types of data what we're having. So next one is that quantitative data versus qualitative data. So the quantitative data is nothing but it can be able to expressed as a number and that can be quantified, and simply can able to put quantitative data that can be measured by the numerical variables. And the qualitative data cannot be expressed as a number and cannot be measured. The qualitative data consists of words, pictures, symbols, and not the numbers here. So examples of this quantitative data will be scores on tests, the weight of the person or subject, your shoe size, and temperature in the room. These are some of the examples of this quantitative data. And the qualitative data will be colors and then names as John and Practica, and then ethnicity as American, Indian, Asian, like this. So these are the examples of the qualitative data. And the next one is that nominal and ordinal data. So here the nominal data is going to be used for labeling variables without any type of quantitative value. And the name nominal comes from Latin word nomen, which means the name, and the ordinal data is the data which is going to be placed into some kind of order by their position on the scale. Okay, so the nominal data is nothing but it should be the thing without applying it to an order. So actually the nominal data could be just called labels, and then the ordinal data may indicate superiority here. So however you cannot determine arithmetic within ordinal numbers because they only show the sequence. So here the examples will be gendered, so women and men, and hair colors will be blonded, brown, beauty, red, like this, and martial status like married woman, widow, and ethnicity Hispanic and Asian. So these are some of the examples of nominal data, and the examples of ordinal data will be first, second, third person competition, letter grades, and then when a company asks the customer to rate the scales on 1 to 10, and economic status like low, medium, and high. So these are some of the examples of the ordinal data. And next thing is that discrete and continuous data. So what is the difference between discrete data and then continuous data? So discrete data is the count that involves the integers, and the discrete values cannot be further divided into parts here. And for example, the number of children in the class is the discrete data. We cannot be count 1.5 cubes like this. And the number of students in the class examples will be, and then number of workers in the company, number of home runs in basketball game, and the number of tests questions can be answered correctly like this. Okay, so these are the some of the examples of this discrete data. And continuous data will be, the continuous data cannot could be meaningfully divided into final levels, and they can be measured on the scale of or continuum and have any numeric value here. So for example, if I am going to measure the height at very precise scales, so the meter, centimeter, millimeters. So these are the examples of this continuous data. The example will be amount of time that is required to complete the project, and height of the children, and the square footage of two-bedroom house, and speed of the car. So these are some of the examples of this continuous data here. Right. So these are the questions that may come in the principles of data management, right? So the first thing is that so basic terminologies of the data management is the question. So here I'm going to discuss what is the data, and then what is the difference between data and information. So data is nothing but facts, events, a transaction which can be recorded, and information means data that has been produced in such a way that should be useful for the recipient. And the nature of the data. So the nature of data will be of two types, like quantitative data, that where you can able to consider the attributes, and quantitative data is the data where you can able to consider the variables. And the quantitative data means examples like the gender and the motivation, etc. So like where the characteristic or traits will be for numerical value that cannot be assigned, and the characteristic or traits where the information can be assigned should be considered as height and weight. And next, another terminology is that constant. So constant is nothing but a characteristics or condition that is going to be that is same for all observed units. That should be the constant. And variables is nothing but where the behavioral science which can be quantified in terms, right? So that thing should be considered as the variable. Again, the variable will be of two types like continuous and then discrete. So continuous variable, so where there's a characteristic to observation can take any values over a particular range, and discrete variables on the other hand which can exist only units, not the fractional value. So attribute and variable. So attribute means where the category and the characteristics to which a subject even does not belongs to, or subject that may be either possess or does not possess. And variable means where you can able to represent the characteristic in terms of numerical value. So qualitative data. So the qualitative data is nothing but where the notion of the magnitude of the size of the characteristic is to be considered, and then they are going to be just categorized. And quantitative data means we can able to describe the characteristics in terms of numerical value, example levels of hemoglobin in the blood and number of lymphoma points, etc. And another question is that codes of the codebook. So what is the various fields of the codebook? What I just cited is that variable names, types of variables, missing values, dichotomy, and codes. So variables, so where we have to follow some rules for creating the variables, and that means the variable name should start with letters and number, and that should not begin with a letter. And types of variables will be uh, uh, based on the SPSS, what we call. And the levels of measurement, so nominal level, so where the value serves mainly as the label or name, and ordinal level, and then rank order, and then and the categories of unique position relatives also considered one of the level of the measurement. And for continuous level of measurement, so interval level measurement is the one, and then ratio level measurement is the one, and then other levels will be dichotomy. So dichotomy is nothing but a variable which is going to be possess only two types of categories like true or false, yes or no, like this. And then missing values, so where you can able to designate either missing information or may indicate a particular question was not asked in a particular case. So there are two types of missings like system missing and then coded missing. So the codes, so here the codes will be useful for coding the data that is going to be recorded in much as detail as possible. And this is the sample codebook for viewing, and this is the other kind of codebook what we're having. And next one is that different types of data. So just now what I said, the data is going to be classified into two types like primary and secondary. So the primary means where the data is going to be gathered by individual person, organized group, and then established practices, or the document in the form of original forms and living organisms, man-made material things, and natural objects and phenomena. And secondary data is nothing but where the data is going to be gathered from books or article published, unpublished master degree, monograph, as manuscript. And the advantage of primary data over the secondary data is that where the primary data give the detailed information in terms of in terms and then statistical units. And the advantage of primary data over the secondary data is that the secondary data usually have a little and no explanatory notes are available. And another advantage of this primary over the secondary is that primary data includes the copy of the schedule and the description of the procedure. And another advantage is that the primary data are usually broken down in finite classification, whereas the secondary data is going to be omit past of the combining categories. And the advantages of secondary data is that where the secondary data is more convenient to use, and already the data what we're having that should be condensed and then organized, and analysis and interpretation also done more easily, and the libraries also make secondary data more easily accessible. And then respondents. So respondent is the individual who is going to be asked and requested by researcher to supply data information about his research problem. And the categories of the data from the respondent will be facts, attitudes and feelings, judgments, and psychometric or skills. and the results of the test and experiment or all other data gathered from primary and the secondary also. So what are the several ways of collecting data is another question. So here we're going to discuss about the clerical tools. So clerical tools like questionnaire method, where the interviewer is going to ask the questions, and then interview method, where the interviewer will be able to ask the question for the respondent, and empirical observation method, registration method, testing method, experimental method, and library method. So these are some of the clerical tools what we are having for gathering the data. And devices for gathering the data will be microscopes, thermometer, cameras, rulers, and then monitors. And what next one is that what are the different forms of the data? So different forms of the data will be qualitative data and then quantitative data. So the qualitative data will be nominal and ordinal, and the quantitative data will be discrete and continuous. So the nominal data will be gender, hair color, ethnicity, and ordinal will be first, second, and third, and then letters grades like ABC, and then economic status like low, medium, high. And quantitative data will be discrete and continuous. So discrete means where the number is going to be fixed here, like number of students in the class, and number of home runs in baseball game, and number of workers in the company. And quantitative data will be continuous data, where the height of the children, square footage of the two-bedroom house, and speed of the cars. Quantitative data and qualitative data. So the quantitative data will be expressed as a number and can be quantified. Simply, the quantitative data can be measured by numerical values, and qualitative data cannot be expressed as a number and cannot be measured. So where the qualitative data consists of words, pictures, symbols, and not the numbers. So examples will be scores on tests and exams, and then colors of the sea will be the example of the qualitative data. And then nominal and ordinal is another kind of the data. So where the nominal data is going to be used for labeling the variables without any type of quantitative value. So where the ordinal data is the data where in which the data is going to be placed some other kind of order. So examples are superiority, or however you cannot uh, do the arithmetic with the ordinal numbers because the only show sequence are going to be considered. So examples first, second, third in competition, and letters grades like ABC. And examples of nominal will be gender like women, hair color, and then martial status. These are examples of this nominal data. What is the other difference between a discrete and continuous? So discrete data is the count that involves only the integer. So where the discrete values is going to be further divided. Whereas continuous data, the data is going to be divided into final levels which can be measured on the scale. So examples of the discrete data will be number of students in the class, number of workers, and number of home rents. And continuous will be amount of time that is required to complete a project, height of children, two square footage of two-bedroom house, speed of the house, like this. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.